Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I kind of got my shit rocked on an existential level this weekend, but I'm going to talk about that in next week's show. No point in getting into it now. For now, I'll say I'm sort of in a state where I'm thankful for everything I have and fearful for how tenuous it all is, which I know is vague, but don't worry about me. For now, I am continuing to meander along. Finally got a few weeks ahead on the show, which is good. And I'm prepping for a big pharma event in New York City next Monday through Thursday. That's going to involve, and I've done this year after year, I've talked about it on the show, hustling from meeting to meeting at a bunch of hotels throughout Midtown Manhattan. I'm hoping I've left enough time between meetings to, accommodate traffic lights and elevator lines and all that stuff. But we'll see. I'm a veteran of this event, and I've learned you don't schedule anything back to back and leave at least 15 minutes between things. Some meetings still go long anyway. We'll see what happens. But rather than get into my whole thing, just read my newsletter. Let's dive into this week's show. So my guest this week is David Small, who was on in 2018 and also came in for a COVID check-in in June of 2020. David has a wonderful new book that is out today, March 12th, 2024, for you time travelers out there. It's called The Werewolf at Dusk and Other Stories, and it's from Live Right Press. Again, we talked in 2018. It's where we met at Small Press Expo to talk about his graphic novel, Home After Dark, the follow-up to his amazing graphic memoir, Stitches. And we have stayed in touch since, but I was still unprepared for The Werewolf at Dusk when I got it. It is an amazing, amazing comic. David adapts 3 unrelated stories, one by contemporary writer Lincoln Michel, one adapted by David from a haunting dream that he had, and one by the late Jean Ferry. And he uses those tales to just haunt the reader with, we'll say, with the promise and the horror of the beast within. We'll put it that way. But just, on a technical level, the pacing of his artwork and the text in this book, the way he edits things down and gets across the action, it's just masterful. And I don't know how much his career in illustrating children's books for other writers sort of trained him in this sort of adaptation, but he just creates these elegant and subtly terrifying stories here in graphic form. His artwork is just gorgeous and at times just leaps off the page. He just always manages to strike the perfect notes for the stories he's telling. And like I said, the pacing of it, what lies where on which pages, it all contributes to this greater whole. It's fantastic. Now, as I say in our conversation, each of these stories feels like it's in its own lived-in world. They all look like David Small drawings, but they all feel like a different piece of David through the art that he uses. And it's amazing to see a book do that without calling attention to itself. He makes the visuals look casual, and yet they're all so perfectly placed. As he puts it in our talk, he says, I work very hard to make things look like they were done in 15 seconds. And that approach and the color choices also throughout the book just make for an absolutely compelling collection. Also, as we talk about The Werewolf at Dusk, each story, in its way, is about transformation into old age or decline. And you guys know I'm a sucker for that. So go get The Werewolf at Dusk and Other Stories by David Small. It is a fantastic book by an artist who is, I think, just at the height of his storytelling powers, even if he keeps saying that he's falling apart. Now, in addition to this, there's another project that I knew about but forgot to ask David about. It was on my list of questions. We just didn't get to it. Here's the email that he sent about it after we were done. I've illustrated T.S. Eliot's love song, A J. Alfred Prufrock, and a local book art center that does really beautiful books is making it into a limited edition, hand-sewn, letterpress, blah, blah, blah book with high-quality digiprints for the art. I'm really excited about this. There will be an even more limited edition, maybe 10, with original drawings tucked inside, and that's what I'm working on now, he writes. So we didn't get into that. I'll talk about it when it's ready. Whenever he sends me information about it, I'll put that in the aforementioned newsletter. Now, as caveats go, we did this one remotely, and jokingly, David's voice wasn't so great, but if you read Stitches, you know that's not too surprising. Now, here's David's bio. David Small is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller Stitches and the recipient of the Caldecott Medal, the Christopher Medal, and the E.B. White Award. He and his wife, the writer Sarah Stewart, live in Michigan. And now, the 2024 Virtual Memories Conversation with David Small. Tell me where The Werewolf at Dusk began. What's the origin of the book? And congratulations on it coming out. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Thank you. I'm very happy with it. Everybody always talks about how long it takes to make a graphic novel. It's talking about 5 years, 6 years, and I've done that too. But this actually started 40 years ago, as I figure it. I'm terrible at math, and I can't remember exactly where I found it, but I know I was in college when I found this collection of surrealist stories, and it was quite a hefty collection. And I was struck at how bad most of the stories were, because they were all done under the aegis of Andre Breton and his dictum that automatic writing was the official way for surrealists to write. He was a dictator, and so you get this pile of stories that didn't go anywhere. They were sort of dreamlike, but more like just free association, and yet there were two stories that really grabbed me in this volume. One was this story. It's called The Fashionable Tiger in this terrible translation. And terrible translation or not, it stuck with me for decades. I just thought it was a terrific little piece of a dream is what it felt like, except that it had more of the structure of a traditional piece of literature. It didn't really end, which is something I took care of here. And it didn't really begin. It's another piece of graphic panels that I added at the beginning, just to make it fuller. But anyway, that story stuck with me, and so did another one by this artist named Leonora Carrington, who I didn't know much about her when I found that book, but I found out a lot about her later on in Mexico, where my wife and I used to go for 25 years. And she was an interesting woman. She was an English woman who had ended up in Mexico. And she was a surrealist, dyed in the wool. Her writings were mostly automatic writing. Her paintings were fairly well painted, all these creepy crawly creatures. I actually bought one of her drawings down there, which I still treasure, but I didn't really respect her art that much. But she did have a compatriot. This is completely off the point. She had a friend named Remedios Varo, who was an excellent painter. She painted like a medieval landscape, like Van der Weyden or something like that. She was so meticulous. And so she was able to translate Carrington's. They shared a lot of ideas, and she would translate Carrington's ideas into really very powerful images. Anyway, to get back to Carrington, she had a story in this collection too called The Debutante, which also had almost the structure of a traditional piece of literature. It was a story about a girl who had a friendship with a hyena at the zoo. She was teaching the hyena French, and the hyena was teaching her language. And when it came time for her debut in society, she hated the idea of that debutante party so much that the hyena volunteers to go in her place. And this all works out fine, except for disguising her face. And to do that, they decide to murder the girl's maid, and they rip off her face, and she wears that to the party. Anyway, that story always struck with me also. So casting around a couple of years ago for a new book, I thought, well, I'll just illustrate those two stories, and I'll use a dream of mine that turned into A Walk in the Old City. And then I'll have a trilogy, and 3 is a good number. So my new agent got in touch with the estates of both Carrington and Jean Ferry, the now dead author of the Tiger story. And everything went swimmingly. The Carrington estate consisted of Carrington's sons, and they gave me permission to go look for a publisher, which I took as a flag to go ahead. I illustrated the whole thing. It took me a year. I was very happy with the results. And then Brenda recontacted the estate, the brothers, and it turned out Carrington left 2 brothers, or two sons, now both in their 70s, who haven't spoken to one another for 10 years. And the second son hadn't been included, I guess, in this first decision. And he said, no way. Nobody illustrates mom's stories except mom herself, which of course is a problem because she's dead. But he refused. And so my book was dead. I couldn't just do it with 2 stories. And I was very, very depressed about this for about 3 months. And then here's the end. One day I'm sitting, scrolling through, I don't know what, online, looking for stories about transformations of humans and animals like the debutante had. And I came across, just by happenstance, this short story that had been originally written by the author Lincoln Michel for Selected Shorts on NPR. I don't know if that program is still running, but it was called Moon Aches, and it's in this book now, word for word, except we changed the title. My editor, Bob Weil, wanted the word werewolf in the title, so Lincoln came up with Werewolf at Dusk, and there you have it. I mean, basically, Lincoln was gracious and took a very small amount of money as an advance, because that's all I had. It was a very small amount of money, and that's how it happened.
And tell me about that theme of transformation. I mean, you talk about it a little in the introduction of the book, that sense of the beast within that covers all three of them. What's it mean to you?
I should have. That is the theme. You just made me realize. Bob asked me to write an introduction for the book, and I said, why? And he said, well, just tell me why you put those three stories together. And the only thing I could come up with was that, there was a kind of foreboding in all three stories, a sense of foreboding, which I translated in the introduction into a sense of dread. But I like what you're talking about. I had forgotten they all three share in common that business of transformation. I don't know.
I'm just going off what you tell me. I'm just the analyst here.
And I'm lying on my back trying to grasp my thoughts. That would have been good. That would have made a good introduction.
But tell me about the process of going with three shorter works after. I mean, you've done 2 graphic novels, full length, in Stitches and Home After Dark. You've also been, ongoing work illustrating kids' books and working in that form. But doing short graphic stories?
It never occurred to me that it would be as different as it turned out to be. But I think doing all those kids' books all those years really prepared me for doing something more concise. The novel offers such a wide, opportunity for expansion in time and development of character. And none of these stories had that, really. And so that was what I could add with my pictures. And I could immediately see that as I read them. Especially, just take Werewolf at Dusk as an example. Yeah. It really tells you very, very little about the character. There are hints, kind of humorous hints, like, he's fighting. He's an old man, and he's so old he can't chase down his prey anymore, but he's still got the impulse. And I love this scene, for example, at the drugstore where the clerk is examining what he's about to buy: Pepto-Bismol and an ice bag and some bandages and stuff. And this stupid clerk makes a silly remark about, looks like you're going to have a party tonight, Dad. And the old man is looking at him and thinking. He says he's got a flush, round face, just the right amount of marbling in the muscle. You get hints of his inner life, his inner thoughts. But I guess the thing that was so enjoyable was that I was able to add a lot of stuff, environmental stuff, expressions, gestures that I think added to the whole experience.
And each of the 3 stories is its own world. Visually, they're all David Small illustrated. They're all David Small stories, but they all feel like a different world. And I was wondering how, what the basic costs are at the beginning. You're doing almost as much work as a graphic novel, coming up with the tone and visual mode for each of them, and yet working in this more concise model when it comes to actually telling the story.
Are they that different? Is it a matter of color, maybe?
I don't think so. I thought about it afterwards, went back and looked at them. They do feel like they're in different lived worlds. And admittedly, the middle one is a dream world.
Yeah.
And yet the details of it visually are so different than the Werewolf at Dusk, for example. And even though they're both old Europe in a sense, the second and the third ones are also different. And it's not just the color scheme that goes into it. But they do feel like each one was a thought-out world in and of itself. Maybe it was intuitive on your part in terms of what the story needed.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, my story, which was based on a dream that I had when I turned 70, I think, definitely looks like what I dreamt. Um,
Yeah.
and I realized as I was drawing it out, for example, these scenes where where the protagonist is walking along this very narrow ledge above a black river with these blank-faced apartment buildings rising above him. Um, that was in my dream so vividly that I didn't realize until I was drawing it out how much it was influenced by Orson Welles.
Yeah.
The Trial. Did you ever see that?
I've seen stills, but I've never watched it. I've got it in my library here. So,
It's very hard to watch.
but that spread in particular jumped out at me, particularly the nature of those buildings. So I'm glad you cited that.
Yeah, but I didn't realize that I had sort of stolen it in my dream from Wells. There's a lot of Wells in that particular story. A lot of camera angles and shadow stuff going on that was straight out of Third Man, which I once I realized that I was being influenced by Wells stuff, I went and let myself go whole hog with it. I studied Third Man. Not my favorite of his films, but visually very powerful stuff that really sticks with you. And I just stole some of that.
Can you talk a little about just that whole process of adaptation, whether it's for the first story with a living author and the second story adapting your own dream into a story and then into visuals, and then in the third working with working with a deceased author's words and figuring out what works and what doesn't. What's adaptation like? Or were those different for you, or do they all ultimately just, it's story? This is what you do with story.
No. Well, maybe with the first two, but the third one, there was a lot of very deliberate use of certain elements in the environment and in the parts of it that I made up. I should explain. The original story, the original story just takes place in this music hall. The guy buys a ticket, takes a seat. He's he's really looking forward to an evening of light entertainment, and then the orchestra starts to play the prelude to this act, which he has seen countless times before, but never expects to see and dreads. It's as if he's the only one in the audience who knows what's going on between the tiger, his tamer, this woman, and the man seated in the loge next to them. He never mentions, Ferry, the author, never mentions the name Adolf Hitler, but it's got to be he. It's got to be him. And I almost didn't illustrate the story because I thought, well, if I make it Hitler, it's going to be too obvious. But then I guess I thought, well, let's make it obvious and see what happens. I think what struck me reading that book that story at first was that he described the setup as this: the tiger and his tamer are going through this kind of corny act, seated in one of the loges of this old-fashioned theater, and next to them, in the loge next to them, is what Ferry called a little man with pale skin and tired eyes, who looked like a bank clerk. And I knew from reading about that period, which has fascinated me, that tipping point between old Germany and new, back in the 20s and 30s. I knew that that description of the little man with tired eyes who looked like just a common clerk of some sort. That was precisely the way people saw him, Hitler, in around 1919 when he was getting into parties of these rich industrialists and trying to raise money for the newly formed Nazi Party. They talked about him like that. They thought of him as a clown who never had a chance of a political life, of getting elected. Does that sound familiar? I just, that's one of the things that, that kind of offhandedness of that fascinated me. And yet it was this little man who controls the tiger by the power of his own will, who keeps him from breaking out and killing who's ever next to him or near to him. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that sense of what you need to add, what the story, what the story meant at the time it came out versus what it means to adapt it nowadays.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think of it still as it would be a great teaching tool for any teacher who understood that period, to point out things like the fact that at the beginning he passes a restaurant and lingers looking in, but examines how much change he's got in his pocket and realizes he can't afford to eat in there, which I think of as an expression of the wild inflation that was going on in Germany at the time. Sure. That apocryphal story about going in for dinner and the price of the menu rising before you even leave. That and the Nazis in the street and their behavior, those are the kinds of things that I try to add to make it a fuller story.
And the difference between that and reshaping your own dreams. And finding story within that. I just found the choice of the three absolutely fascinating, what you use in the book and how different the genesis of each of them are. That sense, especially in the middle of looking into your own psyche and pulling story out of it.
I'll tell you, it was based very specifically on a dream that I had as I was realizing that I was entering old age. But I drew it out exactly as I had dreamt it. But my editor, Bob, he said, it's not enough. You've got to add something to it, David. I don't know what, but you've got to make it more understandable, less personal and more understandable for the common reader. So the story is essentially my dream up until a certain point. And I also changed the dreamer from myself into a psychiatrist. We can talk about that later. I'm not sure I quite understand it, but I made him into a kind of a person who thought himself superior because he had such terrific understanding of other people and their psyches. And yet it's his, if this is his dream indeed, and there's a question about that toward the end, who's dreaming what, then he's destroyed by his own psyche, by his own id. So I changed the character and I added some stuff. My dream went like this. I found myself walking through a part of the old city, which reminded me a lot of Portugal, Oporto, which I once visited briefly. And I found myself stumbling through the dark and ending up on this ledge above a black river. And an old man came along, and I asked him for help. And he turned around and pointed in the other direction and led me along the ledge to this bridge, which he crossed quite easily, even though the bridge was strung with old webs and these gigantic spiders, which, of course, were terrifying to me. But I wanted to keep following the old man, so I imitated him and crossed the bridge without any harm. And we went into his simple room, and he set about making tea for me. And as I sat there admiring the simplicity of his life and his generosity with his meager provisions, I suddenly looked up and realized that the whole apartment inside was strung with those same ghastly, enormous spiders. And then I realized that the old man was blind. I took a closer look at him and realized that he was blind. And that was the end of the dream. As I woke up and thought about it, it immediately hit me. This is a kind of an instruction. It's about how to handle old age. You've got to be, to a certain extent, in denial to get through it. As your body and your mind begin to fall apart slowly, hopefully not too quickly. You've got to, in order to live with these changes, you just got to be in denial. And that was what, Bob appreciated, but he wanted me to flesh it out somehow. So I added the rest of the story, which made it a kind of a Borgesian situation. Yeah. Or
without skimping on that initial theme, though. So, and again, we talked about transformation being the theme. It feels like the transformation into becoming an old person, threads through this in a lot of ways, or at least seeing times change around you, as we see in the third one.
Yeah.
Boy, it's a heavy book.
That's right. Yeah.
What did this book teach you about storytelling?
Taught me I wanted to do more short stories, but
yeah,
I'd love to do another collection of good short stories, but believe me, they're hard to find. Or maybe they're hard to find given my tastes, my proclivities. What I like about all three of these stories is the everydayness of the surroundings, even though, the second one is obviously European and the third one is in the past. There's something, just so familiar about the places where stuff. What am I trying to say? I'm not a big fan of science fiction, and I really don't care for things that are too fantastical. The way this old werewolf and what the guy goes through in the middle story, and the guy in the theater, they're all so familiar somehow, and then these horrible things occur, these revelations. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, that's what anchors the whole thing for me is the reality of those three people.
Yeah.
They're not characters. They're people, despite how, again, as you mentioned, how wordless some of it can get, how much you're conveying just through the visuals of storytelling.
Yeah.
Their reactions and who they are still come out, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what I meant about liking short stories too. It's what you can add visually.
You You did mention last time we talked, which was early COVID, a few months into 2020. You alluded to a graphic novel that was in the cards, but happier with short fiction at this point? You don't have to say anything, because if it's one of those, this is my next book, I don't want to jinx it moments. So
no, I'm going toward brevity, or at least preferring that. I don't think I want to do another novel.
Yeah.
The first one was easy because it was my memories. It's not really a novel, although it needed that kind of structuring to make sense. But the second one nearly killed me. And the fact that it didn't do so well in the market sort of reinforced the idea that I don't want to go through that again.
Gotcha.
Why it didn't do well, I don't know. Bob Weil says he loves the book. He's going to keep it in print until it finds its audience. I hope he does. There's certain things I really love about it. I think what happened was, you're reminding me, COVID was waiting in the wings when that came out. Home After Dark was called at the publisher the best reviewed graphic novel of the year, and that was why they decided at the last moment to send me on this coast to coast book tour, and nobody came, hardly anybody in any of the audiences, which I took personally, of course, but until I found out later on that nobody was coming to these events anyway. And I guess it was because of COVID. I don't remember a lot of masks at the time, but I think people were afraid of large social gatherings. And also, it coincided with the #MeToo movement, which is interesting because it was as if, we've had it with male toxicity. So, we're going to go in this direction now. And that book, Home After Dark, was all about male toxicity. So it was the zeitgeist, man.
Yeah.
But back to just the labors of the novel. I don't know, unless I got a great idea. It really did take me 5 years to do that book. And I don't know why I'm such a slow worker. I worked very hard to make things look as if they were done in 15 seconds. But that's hard to do.
Which also gets at the gap from the last time you and I spoke. I know we've stayed in touch over the years, but before that, I'll mention that one of my first guests this year, Sammy Harcum, was 14 years from the time he started his graphic novel to having it come out. Admittedly, not working on it full time, but still.
Yeah.
But yeah, it strikes me that we spoke June of 2020. And I re-listened to that conversation for this, and it was one of my COVID check-ins, just seeing how you were doing. And of all bizarre things, you'd mentioned being diagnosed with the same form of leukemia that I would end up getting diagnosed with a year later. And at the time, I was talking about how you do all this stuff, and I can't draw, so I don't understand anything that goes into drawing. And again, a year later, I had taken up drawing and had this moment of, it turns out 50 years of reading comics has actually completely permeated my brain, and I get why certain things are done now because I've actually put pen on paper. So things have changed for me in the last 4 years. How about you? So
you mean health-wise? Yeah.
Health-wise, art, everything.
Okay. Here's two big changes. My leukemia is totally in remission.
Good.
I don't even think about that anymore. I still take a couple of pills for it. No, the big health thing that's going on here is that Sarah she's going into her third year of long COVID, which has kept us in the house. I mean, it kept us at home for 5 years. We haven't traveled anywhere. And it's terrible. It's a terrible, insidious thing to have.
Yeah.
You're exhausted all the time. your memory doesn't work as it should, and nobody believes you because you don't look sick. You know,
Right.
it's but good news. Her doctor, who is preaching patience all this time, he gave a IQ test to all of his patients over 60, and Sarah, who's quite a bit older than 60, was the only one who aced it. So
Good.
that took, away the fear that these memory problems that she's had might be something other than long COVID. I just want her back fully.
Yeah.
It's a drag for both of us, and but I have confidence. I see little incremental improvements all the time in her. So, and she's got a will of iron, and she's very strong. So I think that'll be fine. Anyway, enough medical talk. And
we're a couple of old men, so we're going to talk about health conditions.
Yeah, this friend of mine, she always said every conversation between old people starts with the organ recital. I love that. In terms of art, big change here. This whole book and 2 or 3 others that I've done was done on my iPad.
I was going to ask, because especially in the first story, there were moments I thought either a lot of it was processed after or it was drawn directly digitally. So, okay. Yeah. Tell me more. Yeah.
It's a program called Procreate. And, I was totally anti-computers for so long. I can't remember what it was that compelled me to hire a guy to come out here and give me lessons. But it turns out he was a wonderful teacher. And what made him especially wonderful for me was he knew my work. He had worked on my website for a couple of years, and all the art that they used on that was fiddled with, cleaned up by him. And anyway, the point of that is he understood what I wanted to do. And he didn't go through, it wasn't like he was teaching a class. He didn't go through all the bullshit, preparatory stuff, fancy things that everybody wants to do, messing around with a photograph, adding text to it, to make your own Christmas cards or whatever it is people want to do. But that's sort of like Chafe described it. He just went directly to showing me how to get my line quality and my simplistic way of adding color. And I just took off as soon as I saw, because having recently gone back and tried to do some old-fashioned pen and ink analog stuff, I realized what I'm not missing about that process that I, used for decades. The cleanup, for one thing, the danger of your ink splattering all over your finished work. This is kind of stuff, because I'm a careless person and I work quickly. These kinds of careless mistakes and drips and stuff like that kept my burn barrel constantly smoking for decades. It's all eliminated. I can make instant repairs. I can take, if what I like about the drawing is the face, I can just automatically cut it and paste it onto another panel, add more drawing of a different nature, and it's also quick and so magic. The only thing that it lacks is finished art to hang on a gallery wall.
Or sell, which is a thing for some of the artists I know.
Yeah. And I guess that's a serious problem, but I never did that. I never stole my art.
Did it change your approach to telling a story? Did it open possibilities for you, I guess, working in this, working digitally?
Yes. Yeah. And it makes it all so quick.
Yeah.
You don't have to go back and redo a whole sheet. Or I'm making it sound a little more problematic than it was, because I never had anything against, because all of my art is going to be reproduced anyway. I never had anything against patches or
Sure.
whiteout, things that make amateur museum goers put their nose up to the work and say, "What's that? I looked at a piece of paper stuck in there." Yeah, well, that's what it is. It was a mistake.
Yeah. That's Ben Catcher was the first one to tell me. He's like, these are just printer's instructions. That's how he described his art back in the day. So.
Yeah. It's not going to show in the final print. Yeah.
But still, that sense of knowing that you can correct or change on the fly more quickly, change the way you would actually tell a story, or at least give you more freedom to, let me try this. Oh, that didn't work. Let me just go try that, as opposed to thinking it out beforehand and worrying about committing quite as much.
Yeah, and if it doesn't work, you just eliminate the whole thing and start all over again. Or take the pieces that you like and, as I said, and transpose them. But all that said, Gil, you're doing things just exactly the way you should do them. I don't think you're working on a computer, are you?
No, everything I do is by hand, which, I've tried doing, the thing I was going to ask about the computer, do you have a texture on the iPad or the tablet, or does it feel like glass when you're working on it? Because the few times I've tried drawing, it's, the glass nature of the iPad doesn't work for me. I know you got to get those overlays that give it more of a paper tooth, I guess.
You can get those, but I don't use one. I just got used to it. I so much like the results. I just
you being an actual artist and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny. What you're saying is exactly what my reaction was to when I was a printmaker, to drawing on plastic, or what was it we used to do in plastic? I guess we used to make prints, but I just hated it. I hated the feel of the plastic, as I probably should with my computer, but I don't. You can buy things that overlay and make a rougher texture, but I don't bother.
No, again, if you can get the results you got for this book that way, that's you clearly do not need to come up with a adaptation or anything, or any more tools. So.
Yeah. But speaking of printmaking, I think the amount of drawing that I did in college, and I was in an art department in Detroit where the emphasis was on drawing and learning anatomy. But also I was in the printmaking department, and I think that was tremendous training, because when you put a mark, you etch a line into a piece of copper or zinc. And if you decide you want to get rid of it, it takes you a week to scrape it off, So you just learn that you either live with your mistakes or you don't make them, period. Mm-hmm. You learn not to make them. I can almost tell looking at people's work if they've had a training in printmaking or not.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's what I was wondering with working digitally, whether you could get more loose than you would with paper, where it's just okay, if this doesn't fly, let me just undo. I'll shake the iPad a little and it'll go away.
Yes, and yes. That's the case.
And how about for the kids' books you've been illustrating? You're still doing those on paper, or have those also gone digital?
It's all digital.
Yeah.
I've done 2 completely digitally, and one that while I was learning that I eventually added some digital stuff to it. But the other thing is art directors don't want to see original work anymore. They want you to do it digitally if you possibly can. I suppose if they really, really loved you and your work, they'd put up with it. But the cost of shipping a book that you spent 15 years on, I used to tell Norton, look, this is my life. You've got to insure it. Things do get lost in the mail. I heard a story about William Steig once. They lost an entire book of his.
Oh, my God.
And they never found it. And he got some money for it, but so what,
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's the whole matter of art directors and assistants handling work that might be, in my case, it would probably have had pastel on it for color. And that stuff comes off, even if you've sprayed it. And spraying it alters the color, of course. So
I have discovered in my amateur art way with my little my flat folding, my flat cabinet over here, where all those pencil things I did are now smudging off of the things above them. But yeah,
do you have spray? Do you spray them?
I haven't. I tried with 1 or 2, and again, it changed what was there somewhat with the pastels that I had done. So I figure, as long as I got a decent scan the first time, I'll just leave them for my my archivist to figure out.
You should spray them, but do it outside because breathing that shit is deadly, literally.
That's why artists are nuts.
That's right.
I figure that and the oil paints and all the other stuff you guys get exposed to. So I'm glad I'm getting to this stuff late. So
yeah. Oh God, so many diseases develop out of that. It's almost as bad as radiation.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't even have your excuse for my leukemia. I don't have any dad exposing me to radiation stories to account for my whole business. But
I don't know why people get that.
Yeah. And younger, apparently. My diagnosis 3 years ago was just, we see this in people in their 50s now. I'm like, okay, I'm now part of the CLL Society, literally, the nonprofit thing. But, strange cohort to belong to.
Why do you belong to that?
Oh, just for the email updates on, treatments and other things they're working on, even though I'm at this point pre-treatment, treatment naive, watchful waiting, they call it. So.
Yeah. Well, you can conquer it, man. I'm here to tell you.
Yeah, that's what I'm not saying I'm looking forward to it, but I'm glad there's been, good news about this whole thing. But, but tell me,
once a month you sit in a chair for 4 hours. They give you something to put you to sleep. You have a nice nap, and you wake up and you have a couple conversations with some nice nurses, and then they take the IV out and they send you home, and that's it.
Nice. That's to look forward to. The best sleep I've had in the last 10 or 15 years was 20 minutes for a colonoscopy. So yeah, I'm looking forward to progressing at some point, but
love those sleep drugs.
Yeah. But tell me, when we talked a few years ago, in 2020, you mentioned that the direction of kids' books was sort of bothering you at the time. Things changed, better, worse? Any vibe at this point, or have you been kind of shifting away from that world over the last couple of years?
Things have changed. And
you don't have to say anything if it's going to get you in trouble. I understand.
I came into kids' books in the early 80s, and my influences back then were people like Tommy Unger, Shel Silverstein, not so much Shel Silverstein, but he did have this kind of wry humor that all of the people who influenced me had this kind of approach to children's books that seemed to say, I want to entertain not only the kids, but I want to have an appeal for the adults who have to read these damn things 75 times a week, you know. And, well, you don't know because you're not a parent, but it's a bedtime dilemma, I think, for a lot of people. And so that's what, you know, those are the kind of books I sought, but they're not being published anymore. Everything is sweetness and light and self-help. You know, you're special, I'm special, everybody has a special something. What kid is going to choose that as a bedtime book? You know, it just, these are things that are bought by grandmothers and or worried parents who can't do the job themselves or who never had the job done for them. And so they buy these books. And the art is fantastic, some of it. It really harkens back to the early 40s, little golden books, when you know, people like Tenniel who did Alice in Wonderland, were completely out of fashion, and the art for children's books became totally for children. And it's beautiful. It's wonderful art. I've tried to imitate that, but I can't. And yet there are no stories to speak of. I do not spend hours and hours in children's bookstores going through the stock looking for stuff, but I know that there are really only a small handful of people still telling stories with good characters in them, which is what I think kids want and deserve. And to hell with the lessons. Every story we tell has a lesson to it anyway. You know, stories, books that start out with something like brush your teeth every night before sleep. You know, it's for me, it's a bad direction. And yet it seems that that's what the big publishers, the big amoebas who have absorbed all the little wonderful imprints that used to have their own personalities, the big publishing houses, they just want to publish stuff that they've seen before, and that's what has been selling. You know, I Love You Grandma books. Who buys those? Grandmas buy those.
Yeah.
And they buy them by the thousands, and so that's what we're going to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder how much is my pet peeve is always the infantilization of adults. And I wonder how much of this is, you know, they want that comfort too, not just the little kids. But,
well, maybe it's for them to begin with, to hell with the kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So nothing's challenging and everyone is, you know, special, like you say.
Yeah.
But
I must say, I should add, I just got I'm on the list for this series of books called Toon Books, which are cartoons.
Oh, yeah. The one from Francois Spiegelman's group. Yeah.
Francois Mouly. Yeah. I don't know how much Art Spiegelman has to do with them, but.
Yeah, I don't know why I said Francois Spiegelman. Francois Mouly. Yeah.
Well, she just came out with a book by David Sedaris, illustrated by a really good artist whose name just flew out of my head.
I'll look it up on the fly.
It's called Pretty Ugly. And from the cover and the brief description of the book, it looks like the kind of book I would have absolutely loved back in the 80s when I started. It would have been...
Ian Falconer is the artist.
Falconer, yeah. He's really...
Yeah. Oh, this book looks great.
Yeah. So who knows? Maybe Francoise Mouly will be responsible for a resurgence in intelligent stories and irreverent situations.
Yeah. And melting kids' brains just a little.
Yes, the way Mad Magazine used to do for us.
Yep. So tell me, again, back when we were together in 2020, you mentioned when it came to what you were reading at the time, you'd been doing a bunch of Cheever, but you had just ordered a whole bunch of Truman Capote's stuff. And I want to know if you, A, kept up with that, B, have been watching the Swans series on TV, and C, what you're reading now.
I read so much Capote that I think I got a sense of what went wrong with him. I mean, he really kind of seemed to get really terrible after In Cold Blood. Maybe fame did it to him. But I love the early stuff pretty consistently. The Grass Harp and so on was really wonderful, evocative Southern writing, which always gets me when it's done well. But I have not seen The Swans. I was intrigued. I tried to get on Hulu, but they made it so hard. Here's why: because I had already subscribed to them once, used up my free month, and then dropped out. So tried to do it a second time. They made it very, very hard for me, and I finally said, "To hell with this." I haven't even heard any good reviews of the show. Yeah. So.
You haven't watched it. I just see people ranting about it on my little literary feeds. But
do they rant or do they praise it?
It's more bitchy ranting, but I think that's because the people who are going to watch that, it's sort of a self-selecting, bitchy ranting crowd.
Yeah. That's what I figured. As to what I'm reading right now, I'm not reading much, actually, because I have something going on with my eyes. I'm seeing double. So without my glasses, I can't really focus very well. They've put little, what do they call them, prisms on my glasses, and I can see again, and I can work again. But that's another matter. I just did finish a book that I thought was pretty wonderful called Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma. Have you heard about that?
I have not read it, but I've heard great stuff about it.
Yeah. I really appreciated that book. It's by a woman her last name is Dederer.
Yeah, Claire Dederer.
Yeah. I don't know what else she's done, but I'm interested to know. She picked a topic close to my heart. She begins telling us how much she adores the films of Roman Polanski. And I belong to that club too. I'll watch anything, I watch anything you make. And have been so pissed off that he's been canceled to the point that apparently his best film, the one he just made in France about the Dreyfus case, it's supposed to be his best film, but they won't show it here because he had sex with a 15-year-old 30 years ago or whatever it was. And anyway, she talks about Dederer talks about her struggle with watching people like Polanski and Picasso, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the whole list of people who, Garrison Keillor just completely wiped off the map because of sexual indiscretions or the fact that they were assholes to begin with. That's the word she uses constantly through the book. And, I have always thought, yes, of course they were assholes. They're artists. Of course they were bad fathers. And by the way, there's several women on the list too. She talks about Joni Mitchell abandoning her child to have a career in music. Are we sad about that? I don't know. I think she's reunited with her daughter now. But even if not, even if she was a terrible mother, how can you be as great as she was as a songwriter and singer in every aspect of your life?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that's where you get that spectrum of criminal behavior versus, okay, this person wasn't a good person, but they made great art. Yeah, that's
yeah.
Trust me, I've still got my uncanceled artists I still appreciate and dig and work that, okay, maybe I don't talk about it in public, but these are, movies or records that I'm still a fan of. But yes, I get that dilemma. I really should pick up that book.
Pick that book up, and I guarantee you, if you did some more digging, every one of those people whose work you admire are assholes in some way. or people they married think they are,
that was also a huge aspect of the we'll say the Me Too era. There was a degree of people outside the bedroom judging what other people's lives and behavior was, and there's a sense, what happens in people's lives, maybe each side is not telling exactly the story, and you rushing to internet judgment to declare this person is now off limits. I think we recognized, well, I hope we recognized there was a too strong backlash, even with the believe all women hashtag for this stuff.
Yeah. But then on the other hand, let's take Picasso. This is straight from the book Monsters. She said she appreciates Picasso and always looked forward to his exhibits. But then she took her teenage daughter to a show of his paintings and told her that there was this, I never heard about this incident, but apparently Picasso and his then wife, Jacqueline, she was sitting for a painting and they had an argument during it. And this is pretty gross, he put out his cigarette on her cheek and then he painted it he put it into the portrait.
Yeah.
Apparently there is a portrait of Jacqueline with a wound in her cheek from that. And that's pretty bad. But the girl, the 15-year-old teenager daughter, she never wanted to see a painting by Picasso again. Never. Mm-hmm. And so hang his genius, for this one pretty terrible indiscretion. But, if I think of it, I'm not a big fan of his paintings. I never have been, but his ceramics and his sculptures just send me over the moon. And to just think of those being put on a trash heap because he and his wife had a fight. No, that's not right.
Yeah.
It's not right.
I get you. And we can go pretty deep in this topic in ways that would get both of us into lots of trouble if it was on mic. So I think we're going to keep talking about this afterwards. But David, thanks so much for coming on. Thank you for The Werewolf at Dusk. I mean, this thing, what strikes me very late as we talk about it, you do kids' books, you do books about being old or the transformation into age. And I'm hoping the next book of stories is something about the middle-aged experience, that you find another perspective and show us what life's like right in that middle point. So.
And you have made me want to go back and rewrite my introduction to The Werewolf at Dusk because you told me.
Paperback edition, you'll see.
Yeah, maybe I can. You've told me what the theme of it is. It's about transformation, and so much better than what I wrote. Maybe
we're a good team, David. But, thanks so much for coming on, and I hope we get together in person. I'll next time I'm in Michigan. I know we didn't get there last time, but I will do my best to come to Mendon.
That would be great. That would be just great. Okay, Gil. Thanks so much.
And that was David Small. His brand new book is The Werewolf at Dusk and Other Stories. It's from Live Right Press. It's an amazing, haunting collection of comics, and I was glad to hear David say he's planning to do more short stories, if only because it means we'll get to see them sooner, rather than a full-length graphic novel that might take him 7, 8, 9 years. But you can find more about David and his work at davidsmallbooks.com, all spelled exactly as it sounds, all one word. He's probably on Facebook, but otherwise not on social media, near as I can tell, which, as we all know, is for the best. So go get The Werewolf at Dusk. And if you haven't read Stitches and Home After Dark yet, you're missing out. I envy you that you're going to get to read these for the first time, because they are both absolutely amazing graphic novels. So go check out David Small, The Werewolf at Dusk, Stitches, and Home After Dark. Now you can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast comes out every week with this somewhat damaged host who manages to get these really great conversations with artists, writers, cartoonists, musicians, and all sorts of other culture-making folks. You can also help it out by telling me what you like and don't like about the show, and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater or art exhibition or comic or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by email, by DM if we're connected on, I think, just Instagram. It's the only thing I'm on now that actually has messages. By a postcard or a letter if you manage to figure out my mailing address, or by using my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long, so you'll get cut off after that. Just call back and leave the rest of your message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something really interesting to share with listeners, but I'd never run something like that without the speaker's permission. So let me know. Now, if you got money to spare, don't give it to me. I mean, I appreciate it. People give through my Patreon, or they do the paid tier on my button-down email, which does not have additional paywalled content. It is just a way for people to show that they want to contribute to the cause. But really, give your money to other people who could actually use it. Give it to institutions in need. For people, you can go through like GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, and all these other crowdfunding platforms. When you're there, you'll find people who need help with medical bills or rent or veterinary bills or car bills, or getting an artistic project rolling. There's all sorts of stuff you can do that'll make a difference in people's lives. When it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank every month. I make targeted election contributions, but my day job is lobbying, so that's part of what I do. But I make contributions to the Poor People's Campaign, Planned Parenthood and Women's Choice Funds, and other funds. Find something. Go out there and find a institution or foundation that you want to give to that'll try to help us build a better world, because they could use the help. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.